Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I found my old laptop for sale on the dark web. The files had videos I never recorded. Alright, so this all started about 2 months ago when I stumbled across my old laptop for sale on a dark web forum. Yeah, I know how that sounds. Why were you even on the dark web in the first place? Fair question. I'm not exactly proud of it. I'd gotten into a habit of browsing those weird hidden forums out of sheer curiosity, watching videos that made me wonder how deep the rabbit hole went, reading creepypasta like the one you're reading right now. But this wasn't like anything I'd seen before. I used to have this old HP laptop. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I had it all through high school and into my first year of college, and it was basically my life at that time. One day though, it just disappeared. I figured I left it in a classroom, or maybe someone swiped it from the cafe I was working at part-time. I was annoyed, but not heartbroken. I had most of my important stuff saved elsewhere. So fast forward to 2 months ago, I'm sitting there on my current laptop, deep in a random forum, and I see this post that catches my eye. It's just titled, "Old HP Laptop for Sale. Cheap." No big deal, right? There are a million laptops on these forums, and most of them are junk or have been ripped apart for parts. But something about the picture they attached made me do a double take. It had these stickers on the cover, 2 of them specifically. One was from this band I was obsessed with in high school, and the other was from a local pizza place that went out of business years ago. Stickers I put there. It looked exactly like my laptop. I started to get that weird feeling, the kind you get when something's off, but you can't put your finger on it just yet. I clicked on the listing, and sure enough, the specs matched exactly what I remembered. The seller's post said something like, "Old laptop, still works. Comes with files intact if you're into old data." That's when my heart dropped. Files intact. I couldn't stop staring at the screen. I knew it was mine. But how? How the hell had it ended up on some shady dark web forum? And more importantly, what kind of files was this guy talking about? I mean, sure, I had papers, essays, maybe some embarrassing old selfies, but nothing worth selling, right? I debated for a good 20 minutes about what to do. Part of me was screaming to just leave it alone, that this was some kind of scam or a virus trap, but curiosity got the better of me, like it always does. So I messaged the seller. I tried to play it cool, asking basic questions like, how old is this laptop? And are there any issues with it? The dude responded pretty quick, saying something like, "No issues, just old. Files still there if you want them." I asked for a price, and he threw out some ridiculously low number, like $50 worth of Bitcoin. My stomach churned, but I agreed. I figured, worst case scenario, I'd just get it back and wipe the thing clean. Maybe it would still work for basic stuff. A week later, a package shows up at my door. No return address, no note, just a plain brown box. I opened it up, and there it was. My old HP, same scratches, same stickers. It felt weird, almost like I was holding a piece of my past I'd long since forgotten. But here's the thing, it looked the same, but something about it felt wrong. The keyboard was kind of stiff, like it hadn't been used in a while. It also had this faint, musty smell to it, like it had been sitting in someone's basement for years. Whatever, I figured. It had been gone for a long time, after all. I booted it up, and to my surprise, it worked just fine. The familiar old Windows startup screen flashed, and there it was, my desktop, exactly as I'd left it the day it disappeared. Same background, same folders, everything. For a second, it felt like stepping back in time, nostalgic almost, but that didn't last long. The first thing I noticed was a folder I didn't recognize on the desktop. It was named simply Videos. Now, I'm pretty organized with my files, and I know for a fact I didn't have a Videos folder before. I'd always saved my stuff in folders with super specific names, so this one stuck out like a sore thumb. I clicked on it, half expecting it to be empty. It wasn't. There were about 20 video files in there, all with weird random names, stuff like 0001.mp4 and randomclip.mov. My heart was pounding at this point, but I clicked on the first one, thinking maybe it was just some corrupted old file or something. The screen went black for a second, and then the video started playing. It was my room, my old room from high school. The angle was strange, like it was shot from a corner of the room, near the ceiling. I could see my bed, my desk, my bookshelf, everything just as it had been, but I wasn't in the video. The room was empty, completely still. I fast-forwarded through it, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything, but there was nothing, just my empty room for 5 solid minutes. I started to feel uneasy, so I closed it out and opened the next video. Same thing, my room, empty, except this one was longer, like 10 minutes. I skipped through, but it was all the same. Nothing. I went through a few more, and each one was the same. My room, no one in it. Just still. It was eerie in a way I can't really describe, like someone had been watching my room for hours, maybe even days, and recorded it. But there was one file left, the longest one, and for some reason, I hesitated before clicking it. If I had known what I was about to see, I don't think I would have opened it at all. But I did. So, I clicked on the last video. This one was labeled 0000.mp4, and right away, I knew it was different. For starters, it was much longer, almost an hour. The thumbnail was just a dark frame, no visible image, like the others had. I hovered over it for what felt like ages, that same weird feeling of dread creeping up my spine. But I couldn't just not watch it, you know. Curiosity was pulling me in, even though my gut was telling me this was a bad idea. The video started the same as the others. My room, same weird angle, like it had been recorded from the top corner. But this time, it wasn't empty. I was in it. It took me a second to recognize myself. But yeah, it was definitely me, sitting at my desk, hunched over my old laptop. I was wearing this hoodie I had practically lived in back in high school, the same one I thought I lost a long time ago. The thing that threw me off was I had no memory of this. None. Like, I didn't remember anyone ever filming me in my room, let alone from that angle. But there I was, staring at the screen like I was deep into something. I leaned in closer to my own screen, trying to figure out what I was doing in the video. My face looked serious, like I was concentrating hard on something. There was this eerie silence in the video too. No background noise, no sound of me typing, nothing. Just the faint buzz you get from old cameras recording in quiet rooms. And then I saw it. I wasn't alone in the room. In the far corner, by the edge of the frame, there was this shadow. At first, I thought it was just some weird lighting effect, or maybe a glitch in the video. But the longer I stared at it, the more I realized that it wasn't just a shadow. It was moving, slowly, barely noticeable at first, but it was definitely there. The shadow grew, stretched, like something was coming closer to me in the video, inch by inch. I kept watching myself, completely oblivious, my face still glued to the laptop screen as this thing crept closer from the corner. My heart was pounding at this point. I wanted to close the video, shut the laptop, and forget about the whole thing, but I was frozen, my eyes glued to the screen. Then, right at the 10-minute mark, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The shadow shifted into something more solid. It wasn't just a dark spot on the wall anymore. It was someone, a figure, not clear, but enough to tell that it was a person, or at least shaped like one. But here's the freakiest part. It didn't look like they were walking. It was like they were just sliding across the floor, like their feet weren't even touching it, almost like they were gliding. And the whole time, I'm just sitting there at my desk, completely unaware. At around the 15-minute mark, the figure was right behind me in the video, and I still hadn't moved, hadn't noticed a thing. The figure leaned down, almost like it was whispering something to me. I swear, the way it moved, it felt intentional, like it had been waiting for the right moment. And then, I did something that sent a chill down my spine. I turned around. In the video, I slowly turned my head, like I sensed something was behind me. But there was no reaction, no panic, no fear. I just stared right at this thing for a few seconds, then turned back to my laptop, like nothing had happened. What the hell? I paused the video, breathing heavily, my mind racing. I didn't remember any of this happening, not one bit. There was no way I would have been that calm with someone or something in my room. I thought maybe this was some kind of trick, like a deepfake or a prank, but the video quality was too low for that kind of thing. It felt real. Against my better judgment, I pressed play again. The figure stayed there for a while, just standing behind me, watching me work at my laptop. Every once in a while, it shifted slightly, but it didn't leave. It didn't do anything. It was like it was waiting for something. At the 30-minute mark, something changed. The lights in the video flickered, and for the first time, I noticed a low, static hum building up in the background. The figure was still there, but its shape was warping, like it was glitching out. And then I did something I'll never forget. In the video, I stood up. Slowly, almost mechanically, I pushed back my chair and stood. My face was still blank, emotionless, like I wasn't fully awake. The figure behind me mirrored my movements, gliding backward as I walked toward the door. The camera angle shifted slightly as I left the room, the figure following close behind me. But the video didn't end there. It kept recording the empty room for the next few minutes, the camera still fixed in the corner. The hum in the background got louder, and then the door opened, and I walked back in. Only this time, I wasn't alone. The figure was gone, but something was wrong with me. My posture was off, like my body wasn't mine anymore. I walked stiffly back to the desk and sat down, but the way I moved was almost puppet-like, jerky, like something was controlling me. I stared at the laptop for the rest of the video, unmoving, my eyes wide open but blank. The video continued like that until the very end, just me, sitting there, not blinking, not moving, just staring. And then, right before the video ended, the screen flickered, and for a split second, I saw something. A reflection, maybe? It was in the laptop screen, barely visible, but it was there. A face. Not mine. Someone else's. And then the video cut to black. I sat there for what felt like forever, staring at the dark screen, my mind racing, There was no way this was real. It couldn't be. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something horrifying. That night, the night in the video, I never remembered what I did. All I knew was that I had woken up the next morning feeling exhausted, like I hadn't slept at all. Now, I was starting to wonder if that night had ever really ended. After watching that video, I felt like the room had suddenly gotten 10 degrees colder. My heart was pounding, my skin crawling with this awful sense that I had just opened something I was never supposed to see. I sat there staring at the black screen of my old laptop, half expecting something else to happen, like the video might start playing on its own again. Or worse, the figure would somehow step out of the screen and into my room. But nothing happened. Just the eerie silence of my apartment, the faint hum of my current laptop next to me, and the low droning sound of my own thoughts spinning out of control. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Not just with the video, but with everything. You know that sensation when you can't quite explain it, but something is off, like reality itself is bending in ways you don't understand. Yeah, that's where I was. I told myself I needed to stop obsessing over it. Maybe the video had been tampered with somehow. Maybe it was some kind of elaborate prank. But deep down, I knew neither of those things made sense. That was my room, my old laptop, and more disturbingly, that was me in the video, doing things I had no memory of ever doing. I decided to shut the laptop down for the night. I couldn't deal with it anymore, at least not right then. As I stood up to stretch and clear my head, I glanced at the clock. It was late, past 1 a.m. That's when I heard it. A faint noise coming from the other room. It was this soft, almost imperceptible creak, like someone was gently pressing down on one of the floorboards. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing up as I strained to listen. My apartment isn't big, just a small one-bedroom with a tiny living room and kitchen. No pets, no roommates, just me. I stood there, waiting, hoping I had imagined it. Maybe it was just the building settling, or something outside. But then it happened again, louder this time. A definite creak, like something, was moving around in the other room. I grabbed the closest thing I could find for defense, a half-empty bottle of water, not exactly intimidating, I know, and crept toward the sound. My heart was beating so fast, I could hear it in my ears, each step feeling heavier than the last. As I reached the doorway to the living room, I noticed something odd. The light from the hallway outside was spilling in through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. But there, near the far corner, was a shadow that didn't match up with anything. A figure. It wasn't moving, but I could see the faint outline of something standing near the far wall. My breath caught in my throat, and for a split second, I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe it was just a weird shadow from the furniture. But then I blinked, and the figure was gone. Just like that. Vanished. I stood there, gripping the water bottle like an idiot, too terrified to move. I didn't dare turn on the lights, because some part of me was scared that if I did, I'd see something I wasn't ready to face. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to walk over to the corner where the shadow had been. Nothing. Just empty space. But that didn't make me feel any better. In fact, it made me feel worse. I couldn't explain what I had just seen, or thought I had seen, but it left me with this gnawing sense that something was watching me, something that didn't belong. I went back to my bedroom and locked the door behind me, as if that would do anything. I sat on the edge of my bed, still clutching that stupid water bottle, trying to convince myself that I was just exhausted, that I'd spent too much time staring at that cursed laptop, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But the feeling wouldn't go away. That sense of being watched. It was like the air in my apartment had changed. Heavier, thicker, like I wasn't alone anymore. Every creak, every rustle of fabric as I shifted on the bed made my nerves jolt. I tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't shut off. All I could think about was that video, the way I had stared blankly at the screen in that final clip, like I wasn't in control of myself, like something else was, and that figure, creeping closer behind me, watching, waiting. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up to the sound of a soft tapping. It was so subtle, like fingernails lightly tapping against wood. I blinked in the darkness, disoriented for a moment, until I realized where it was coming from. The door. Someone, or something, was tapping on my bedroom door. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. The tapping was steady, rhythmic, like whoever, or whatever, was on the other side was being careful not to make too much noise. I held my breath, straining to hear anything else, but there was only that soft, persistent tap, tap, tap. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in place, but it felt like hours. My mind was racing through every possible explanation. Maybe it was the building again, or maybe I had left a window open and a draft was causing something to move. But I knew that wasn't it. The tapping continued for a few more minutes, then stopped, just as suddenly as it had started. I didn't move. I didn't even dare breathe. I just sat there, staring at the door, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, I mustered up the courage to get out of bed and approach the door. My hand was shaking as I reached for the doorknob, heart pounding in my ears. I half expected it to be locked, even though I hadn't touched the lock since I went to bed. It wasn't. I opened the door just a crack, peering out into the dimly lit hallway. Nothing. The apartment was quiet, still. No shadows, no figures, no signs that anyone or anything had been there. But as I stood there, listening to the silence, I noticed something. The old laptop was still on my desk. The screen was dark, but there was a faint, rhythmic sound coming from it. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't coming from the door. It had never been coming from the door. It was coming from inside the laptop. I stood there, frozen in my doorway, staring at the laptop on my desk. The tapping sound, soft, rhythmic, and so eerily deliberate, was coming from the laptop itself. The same tap, tap, tap I had heard from my bedroom. It didn't make any sense. How could a sound be coming from inside a computer like that? My mind raced through possibilities. None of them made sense. Maybe it was some kind of audio glitch, a looped recording playing back from one of those creepy videos I'd watched. But no, the laptop was powered down. The screen was pitch black. But that sound, it was coming from there. I couldn't deny it. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I walked over to the desk, each step feeling like it took an hour. My breath was shallow, and my hand was trembling when I finally reached for the laptop. My fingers hovered over the touchpad for a moment, debating whether to even open the damn thing again. What was I hoping to find? The tapping continued. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, steady, like someone, or something, was waiting for me. With a shaky breath, I pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, and for a second, everything seemed normal. Just my old desktop background, my icons, the same layout from years ago. But then the tapping stopped, replaced by silence. And that silence, it was worse. I clicked around the desktop, half expecting to see something strange. A new folder, a pop-up, some kind of warning. But everything looked exactly the way it did before. No sign of anything out of the ordinary. Then, I noticed something. In the bottom right corner of the screen, a small icon had appeared. It wasn't there before. It looked like a folder, but the name beneath it was just a single question mark. I hesitated. Every instinct in my body screamed at me not to click it, but I did. The folder opened, and inside, there was only one file. No name, just a single video file. The icon was the same black thumbnail as the last video I'd watched. The timestamp? 0000000. I felt sick just looking at it, but I couldn't stop myself. I clicked on it, and the video player opened, the screen once again going dark. But this time, the camera wasn't in my old room. It was in this room. My heart practically stopped. The angle was the same, like it had been set up in the corner of my current bedroom. The timestamp showed that the video had been recorded only a few hours ago. The room was dimly lit by the soft glow of my lamp, just like it was right now. And then I saw myself. I was lying in bed, under the same covers I had just climbed out of. My back was to the camera, my body rising and falling with each slow breath. I felt this overwhelming wave of nausea. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Who had filmed this? How had they gotten into my apartment? How had I not heard anything? The camera remained fixed on me as I slept, everything in the room perfectly still. For a moment, I let myself believe that maybe this was just some bizarre prank, maybe a creepy way of messing with me. But then the figure appeared. At first, it was just a shadow at the edge of the frame, blending into the darkness of the room. It stood completely still, barely distinguishable from the background. But as the minutes ticked by, it began to move, slowly, deliberately, inching its way closer to my bed. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen, even though every part of me was screaming to look away. The figure moved closer and closer until it was standing right beside my bed. It didn't make a sound. It didn't move like a normal person. There were no footsteps, no shifting weight, just a strange, gliding motion as it positioned itself directly over me. In the video, my sleeping self didn't stir. I didn't move an inch as this thing leaned down over me, like it was inspecting me, studying me. The longer I watched, the more I realized. The shape of the figure wasn't right. It was human-shaped, sure, but it was wrong in subtle ways. The limbs were too long, too thin, and the head seemed to tilt at an unnatural angle, like it was too heavy for the neck to support. And then, in the video, the figure reached out. A long, shadowy hand extended toward my sleeping face, fingers hovering just inches from my skin. I felt my stomach churn with dread. I wanted to scream, to yell at myself to wake up, but I knew it was pointless. The figure stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, its hand almost touching me, but not quite. And then, just as slowly as it had arrived, it began to pull back. I exhaled, not realizing I had been holding my breath. But just as the figure began to fade back into the shadows, something even worse happened. My sleeping self, still motionless, still oblivious, spoke in a low, hollow voice that sent chills straight down my spine. I heard myself mutter a single word. Soon, the figure froze, its head tilting again, as if listening closely. Then it disappeared, fading into the darkness until the room was once again empty, save for my sleeping body. The video ended abruptly after that. No fade out, no noise, just a sharp cut to black. I sat there, staring at the screen, my entire body shaking. I had no memory of any of this. None. And the way I had spoken, it wasn't my voice. It sounded like me, sure, but there was something hollow about it, something wrong. I slammed the laptop shut, breathing heavily, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. It felt impossible, like this couldn't be real. But I knew, deep down, I couldn't explain it away anymore. There was something horribly, terribly wrong with this laptop, with the videos, with me. And then I heard it again. The tapping. This time, it was louder, clearer. And it wasn't coming from the laptop anymore. It was coming from the closet. Tap, tap, tap. I turned, my eyes locked on the closed closet door at the far side of my room. The tapping continued, louder and more insistent, like whoever or whatever was behind that door was waiting for me. I stood up, my legs weak, barely able to hold me up. My mind was racing, trying to come up with any explanation, any way to rationalize this. But the sound was too real, too close. Tap, tap, tap. I took a step toward the closet, then another. My breath was shallow, my pulse hammering in my ears. And then, without warning, the tapping stopped. The silence was deafening. I stood there, frozen, hand inches from the closet handle, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But the tapping didn't start again. Slowly, I reached for the handle, my fingers brushing against the cool metal. And just as I was about to pull the door open, I heard it. A voice. My voice. From inside the closet. Soon. I froze, my hand still gripping the closet door handle. My own voice had just come from inside. But it wasn't normal. There was something wrong with it. Like it was hollow, distant, and echoing in a way that didn't belong in this world. I stood there, breath caught in my throat, waiting for something else to happen. Seconds passed, each one feeling like it stretched on forever. My mind was spinning. I couldn't process what was going on. How could my voice be coming from inside the closet? How could any of this be happening? My hand started to slip off the door handle. I wanted to back away, to run, to get the hell out of my apartment, but my body wasn't listening. Something deep inside me was telling me I had to open it, that whatever was in there, I needed to face it. With one last shaky breath, I pulled the door open. It swung open slower than I expected, creaking like an old wooden door in some horror movie. But what I saw inside wasn't what I was prepared for. Nothing. Just clothes, hanging neatly, shoes on the floor, the usual clutter. No shadowy figure, no strange reflection of myself. For a split second, I let out a sigh of relief. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe my mind had been playing tricks on me after everything I'd seen that night. But then I looked closer. There, tucked between the folds of my hanging clothes, was a small mirror, a round, old-looking mirror I didn't recognize. I never put that there. I had no idea where it had come from. I stepped closer, my curiosity overpowering the fear just long enough to make me reach for it. I pulled it out from between the clothes and held it up to my face. It was dusty, the surface cloudy and grimy, like it had been sitting untouched for years. But as I wiped it clean, my reflection came into view, and that's when I noticed it. The reflection wasn't right. At first glance, it was me, my face, my tired eyes, my messy hair. But as I looked closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. My reflection wasn't mirroring me. It was off, just slightly. My face moved slower than it should have. My eyes blinked out of sync. And there was something else, something darker in the background. Behind me, in the reflection, I saw the figure. That same shadowy figure from the video, standing right behind me, watching. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there, just my empty room. I whipped my head back to the mirror, and the figure was still there, standing closer now, almost right over my shoulder in the reflection. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to drop the mirror, throw it across the room, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring into it, my reflection growing darker, twisted. The figure behind me didn't move. It just stood there, looming over me, like it was waiting for me to notice something. And then, in the reflection, my mouth began to move, but I wasn't speaking. My reflection's lips parted, and in that same hollow, distant voice, it whispered again. Soon. I stumbled back, the mirror slipping from my hands and shattering on the floor. The pieces scattered, but the figure was gone. No more reflection, just shards of glass at my feet, glittering under the dim light. But the air in the room, it had changed. It felt thick, heavy, like something was pressing down on me. I was trembling, sweat pouring down my face as I backed away from the closet. I grabbed my phone, desperate to call someone, anyone, to get out of this nightmare. My fingers fumbled as I opened my contacts, but as soon as I hit the call button, the screen flickered. My phone went dark. Dead. I looked at my old laptop, still sitting on the desk. The screen had turned on again, but this time it wasn't showing my desktop. It was showing me. A live feed, from the same angle as the videos. I was staring at myself, standing in the middle of the room, looking completely lost, terrified, but I wasn't alone. Behind me, in the live feed, the shadowy figure stood just at the edge of the frame. Slowly, almost deliberately, it began to move toward me, inching closer, just like in the videos. I turned around, expecting to see it in the room with me, but there was nothing there. I looked back at the screen. The figure was still getting closer, and my reflection was just standing there, watching, not moving. Then, in the corner of the screen, I saw it, the closet door. It was slowly closing, on its own. My heart raced. I ran toward it, ready to slam it shut, to lock it, do anything to keep whatever was in there from getting out. But just as I reached it, the door clicked shut, and behind me, from the laptop, I heard it again, my own voice. Soon. I felt a chill crawl down my spine, and for the first time, I felt it, the figure. It wasn't behind me on the screen anymore. It was standing right behind me in the room. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I ran for the front door, my legs barely carrying me as I stumbled over myself. I yanked the door open and bolted out into the hallway, not daring to look back. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might explode in my chest, but I didn't stop. I didn't stop until I was outside, in the cold night air, gasping for breath, shaking uncontrollably. I don't know how long I stood out there, staring up at my apartment, waiting for something, anything, to happen, but nothing did. The next day, I went back to my place. I had no choice. I couldn't stay away forever. But when I walked in, everything was exactly where I had left it. No signs of anything strange. No figure. No tapping. Nothing. The laptop was still on my desk. I stared at it for a long time, debating whether to even touch it again. Eventually, I gathered the courage and opened it. The videos. They were gone. The folder, the files, everything, like they had never been there. But that's not the worst part. The mirror I had dropped, the one that shattered all over the floor. It wasn't broken anymore. It was back on the shelf in my closet, whole, as if it had never been touched. And when I looked into it, for the briefest moment, I saw it. The shadow, standing in the reflection, watching, waiting. For what? I still don't know. But whatever it is, I can feel it. It's coming. Soon. Okay, let me start by saying this isn't some kind of fake horror story like the ones you hear about urban legends or creepy YouTube videos. This is real, and I know how insane it's going to sound. But trust me, you'll want to hear me out before you brush this off as a prank or some overblown Reddit post. My life, as I knew it, has completely spiraled out of control, and it all started with one drunken, angry, stupid decision. To give you some context, I had this friend. Let's call him Jake. We've been close since high school, but things changed over the last year. I don't know when it started exactly, but he began to get possessive, manipulative even. It wasn't obvious at first. It's the kind of slow, creeping thing that sneaks up on you. But before I knew it, he was controlling almost every aspect of my life, from who I could hang out with, to what I posted on social media, to even who I could date. At first, I thought maybe he was just being protective, but it got worse. A few months ago, I started dating this girl, Emma. Jake hated her from the second he met her. And by hated, I mean he went out of his way to trash talk her to anyone who would listen, spread rumors, even tried to convince me that she was cheating on me with some guy from her work. I didn't want to believe him, but the guy was convincing. He's got that kind of smooth-talking personality, you know. The kind of guy who can make anyone believe anything. Long story short, Jake manipulated me into dumping Emma. I felt sick about it, but at the time, I didn't know what else to do. He'd been in my head for so long, twisting everything, making me feel like I was the one losing it. I was convinced that Emma wasn't good for me, but the moment she was out of my life, I realized what had happened. Jake wanted me all to himself. I'm not saying it in a romantic or creepy way, at least I don't think so, but he had this weird obsession with controlling me, and I snapped. One night, after too many beers and a head full of anger, I found myself in a very dark corner of the internet. I don't want to get into how I got there, because honestly, I'm not even sure how I did. I'm no hacker or tech wizard. But I'd heard stories about the deep web and dark web, places where you can hire someone to do anything, no questions asked. And in my messed up, drunk state, that's exactly what I was looking for. I didn't want to kill Jake, not at first. I just wanted him to be scared, to back off. I wanted him to feel a fraction of the fear and paranoia he'd been putting me through. I thought maybe hiring someone to rough him up, just enough to send a message, would be enough. But then I stumbled across him. I still remember the page vividly. It didn't look like one of those typical dark web hitman-for-hire websites. Not that I had any experience, but I'd seen enough movies to know what I expected. No, this page was basic, almost too simple. Just black text on a white background with a title at the top, The Terrifier, specialist in fear and elimination. Below that, there was a single line of description. I will make your nightmares real. No mercy, no mistakes. Once hired, I cannot be stopped. That's it. No flashy graphics, no contact forms, nothing. Just a single email address at the bottom. I should have backed out right then. My gut was screaming at me that this was a terrible idea, but I was drunk angry and desperate. Jake had ruined everything, and I wasn't thinking straight. So I shut off an email, giving only basic details, saying that I wanted Jake dealt with. I didn't give a lot of specifics, just his name, where he lived, and a message saying I wanted him scared, but not dead. I hit send and immediately felt a wave of regret wash over me. But it was done. The next morning, I barely remembered sending the email at all. I figured it was a drunken mistake, like all the other dumb things I'd done while drunk, and tried to forget about it. For a week, nothing happened. Jake was still being his usual controlling self, and I was starting to think the whole thing was some elaborate scam. Or maybe I hadn't even sent it at all. Maybe it was just some twisted dream, like my mind was trying to process how badly I wanted Jake out of my life. But then, things started getting weird. It began with small stuff. Jake stopped texting me. I mean, completely. This was the guy who would blow up my phone every day with nonsense or demands to hang out. At first, I was relieved. Finally, some peace. But after a few days, it started feeling off. We had the same group of friends, and no one had heard from him either. He wasn't posting on social media. He wasn't replying to messages. He wasn't showing up to our usual hangout spots. Then, one of my friends mentioned something strange. Jake hadn't been at work in days. No one had seen him. I tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I told myself he was just lying low. Maybe he was pulling some weird mind game, trying to make me freak out for ignoring him. But then I got the email. It was from the same address I'd contacted a week before. The subject line was simple: complete. The body of the email sent chills down my spine. Jake has been eliminated. You cannot cancel. Eliminated. I stared at that word for what felt like hours. My stomach twisted. Eliminated didn't mean scared or roughed up. It meant dead. My heart was racing. I wanted to believe it was a joke, some sick prank, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Jake was gone, and it was my fault. But that's not even the worst part. The next line of the email is what's keeping me awake at night. You're next. After getting that email, I was paralyzed for what felt like hours, just sitting there, staring at my screen. I kept telling myself it wasn't real. I mean, this had to be some kind of joke, right? The kind of thing someone would do to mess with me after hacking my email or finding out what I did on the dark web. But there was this nagging voice in the back of my head, whispering, what if it's not? The next couple of days were a blur. I didn't hear anything from Jake, and no one else did either. It's like the guy had completely dropped off the face of the earth. His phone was still off. He wasn't showing up at his usual places, and even his social media accounts went dark. That wasn't like him at all. Jake lived for attention. The guy couldn't go 5 minutes without posting some selfie or tagging himself at a party. But I couldn't go to the police. What would I say? Oh, hey, I might have hired a hitman online to scare my best friend, but I think he actually killed him. Yeah, that would go over well. No, I was stuck, completely stuck, with this weight of guilt growing heavier every day. And then the reports started rolling in. A friend of mine, Tim, texted me a screenshot from a local news site. The headline: Local man missing, Jake Reynolds last seen a week ago. There was a grainy photo of Jake in his usual cocky pose, the one he always used for his profile pics. But now, the sight of it made my skin crawl. This was real. Too real. I tried to keep calm, told myself that people go missing all the time, and they usually turn up. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. I wasn't ready for what came next. A couple of days after Jake was officially declared missing, I started noticing something strange around my apartment. It wasn't obvious at first, just a feeling like I was being watched. It sounds cliché, but trust me, once you feel it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's this deep, unsettling sensation, like eyes are on you, even when you're alone. I brushed it off as paranoia. I mean, I had enough reasons to be paranoid, right? But it didn't stop. Every time I left my apartment, I'd see the same car parked down the street. A beat-up old sedan, something you wouldn't think twice about if you weren't paying attention. The first time, I didn't think much of it. But after seeing it day after day, parked in the exact same spot, with no one ever getting in or out, I started to get freaked out. I tried to tell myself it was just a neighbor's car, but the feeling in my gut wouldn't let it go. Then, I started hearing footsteps outside my apartment at night. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, like someone was pacing right outside my door. It always happened at the same time, around 2 or 3 in the morning. I'd lie there, frozen, listening to the slow, deliberate thud, thud, thud of boots against the hallway floor. But every time I worked up the courage to check, no one was there. Just an empty hallway and the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. One night, though, it got worse. I woke up at 2:30 a.m. like clockwork to those same footsteps. Only this time, they didn't stop outside my door. They moved to my window. Now, I live on the second floor of an old building, and the window in my bedroom faces the back alley. No fire escape, no balcony, just an alley below. So, when I heard the faint tap, tap, tap of fingers against the glass, I froze. I didn't want to look. Every instinct I had screamed at me to stay in bed, to pretend like I hadn't heard it. But I couldn't help it. My eyes drifted towards the window, just barely catching movement out of the corner of my vision. There was someone standing outside, on the second floor, pressed right up against the glass. I couldn't see much, just a shadowy outline of a man's face and shoulders, framed by the faint glow of the streetlight down the alley. But that wasn't what scared me the most. What terrified me was that the figure wasn't trying to get in. He was just watching me. I don't know how long I stayed like that, my eyes fixed on the window, too afraid to blink. But eventually, the figure turned and disappeared into the darkness below. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I tried to convince myself it was just some drunk guy who climbed up there, maybe someone who got lost. But I knew better. I knew this had something to do with the email, with Jake, with the Terrifier. The next day, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, and the only place I knew to look was back on the dark web. The thought of going back there made me feel sick, but I didn't have a choice. I retraced my steps, found the same forum where I had first stumbled across the Terrifier's page, and checked for any new activity. That's when I found something that made my blood run cold. There was a new post on the page. It was addressed to me, not by name, but it was obvious it was meant for me. The title was simple: "The job isn't done." I clicked on it, heart pounding in my chest. The post was short, but every word felt like a knife to my throat. Your friend was only the beginning. I don't stop until the contract is complete. And now, it's your turn. You know where to find me. What the hell did that mean? My turn? I hadn't even wanted Jake dead in the first place. And now, this psychopath was coming after me. The post had a link at the bottom. Against my better judgment, I clicked it, and it took me to a live feed. A black and white grainy video. like from an old security camera. For a second, I thought maybe it was a random clip, something from a street corner or an empty parking lot. But then the camera panned, and I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. It was my apartment, from the alley, the same angle where I had seen the figure watching me last night. The feed was live, and the timestamp showed it was being recorded in real time. I could see the window of my bedroom from the outside, and there, standing just out of view, was a shadowy figure, looking up. I slammed my laptop shut, heart racing, panic setting in. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? Run? Confront him? But I already knew the truth. No matter where I went, the Terrifier would find me. He was already too close. After that night, after seeing the live feed of my apartment, I barely left my place. I became a prisoner in my own home. Not that it made me feel any safer. If anything, it made things worse. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the walls felt like a warning. I'd sit on my couch for hours, clutching my phone, waiting for something, anything, to happen. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I just waited. And then, something did happen. It was the third night, after I saw the live feed. I was sitting in my living room, the curtains drawn tight, lights off. I had a bat by my side. Not that I thought it would do much against someone like the Terrifier, but it was the only thing I could think to grab. The air felt heavy, like the calm before a storm, and my heart wouldn't stop pounding. That's when I heard it. A knock. Not the kind of knock you'd hear from a friend or delivery guy, though. No, this was different. It was soft, almost polite, but deliberate. 3 slow knocks. Tap, 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 as if whoever was on the other side knew exactly what they were doing, knew exactly how much time to leave between each one to send my anxiety through the roof. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just sat there, staring at the front door, the bat trembling in my grip. Maybe if I stayed quiet, they'd go away. Maybe I was imagining it, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. I knew exactly who it was. The knocking came again. Tap, tap, tap. This time, it was louder. Not aggressive, just patient. Like whoever it was had all the time in the world. I tried to muster up the courage to speak, to yell something like, "Go away," or "I'm calling the police," but my throat felt like it was filled with cement. I couldn't make a sound. All I could do was listen. The door was thick, but I could hear him on the other side, breathing. The steady, shallow sound of someone just inches away, waiting. The doorknob didn't move. There were no more knocks, just that soft, almost too quiet breathing. For a moment, I thought about opening the door. Not because I wanted to, but because a part of me felt like I had to. It's hard to explain, but it's like the air in the room was pushing me towards it. My hand moved on its own, like my body was no longer under my control. I actually stood up, made it halfway to the door before I realized what I was doing. That's when I snapped out of it, backed up to the far wall, and just stood there, shaking, heart slamming against my ribs. I don't know how long I stood there, listening to that breathing. Minutes, hours, time felt warped. At some point, the breathing stopped, and the air in the room shifted again, lighter, like whatever was out there had left. I didn't dare check the peephole. I didn't dare move. It was a long time before I felt safe enough to crawl back to the couch. I didn't sleep at all that night, just lay there, bat clutched to my chest, eyes locked on the door. But nothing else happened. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in days. I left my apartment. I didn't want to, but I felt like I was losing my mind inside those four walls. My plan was simple. Head out, grab some food, get some air, and try to pretend, even for a little while, that I still had some control over my life. I figured if I stayed in public, I'd be safe. After all, the Terrifier wouldn't try anything in broad daylight, surrounded by people, right? I wish I'd been right. I made it to the grocery store without incident, but that feeling, the one that had been creeping up on me for days, was still there. That sense of being watched. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just paranoia, but every time I looked over my shoulder, I could have sworn I saw movement. Nothing concrete, just shadows. A flicker of someone disappearing around a corner, or the vague shape of a man standing too far back to make out. I hurried through the aisles, grabbing whatever I could, just wanting to get back home. But as I reached the checkout, I froze. There, on the counter, was a little folded piece of paper. At first, I thought someone had dropped it, maybe a shopping list or a coupon. But when I picked it up, I saw my name written on it. Not my full name, just the name my friends called me. The name only a handful of people knew. My hands were shaking as I unfolded it. The message was short, but it made my blood run cold. I'm closer than you think. I left everything right there in the store and ran. When I got back to my apartment, I double-locked the door, shoved a chair under the knob, and closed every window and blind. My breathing was ragged, my chest tight with panic. I didn't even know what I was running from anymore, but I knew it wasn't just some guy on the other side of the door. No, this was bigger. This was something else. I checked my laptop, desperate for some kind of clue, something I missed. I logged back into the dark web forum, hoping there would be some kind of new post or message that could tell me what the hell was going on. And there was. The Terrifier had updated his page again. I never forget a contract. You can run, you can hide, but once the deal is made, it cannot be undone. Underneath, there was a link to another live feed. I hesitated, my fingers trembling over the trackpad, but I couldn't stop myself. I clicked it. This time, the feed wasn't from my apartment. It was from the grocery store, the same one I had just run from. And in the grainy black and white footage, I saw myself, standing there in the checkout line, just before I found the note. But what made my heart stop was what I saw next. In the background of the video, barely visible, was a figure standing at the entrance to the store. A tall man, dressed in black, his face obscured by shadows. And he wasn't looking at me. He was looking directly into the camera, like he knew I'd be watching, like he was waiting for me to see him. The feed cut out. I slammed my laptop shut again and backed away from the desk, my head spinning. He was following me, watching my every move. And no matter where I went, he'd always be one step ahead. I tried calling the police, but what could I say? I didn't even know where the Terrifier was. The man was a ghost, slipping in and out of my life, like he'd always been there, like he was some twisted part of my own shadow. The police wouldn't believe me. Hell, I barely believed myself anymore. But I knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to stop. Not until he finished the job. Not until I was eliminated. I didn't leave my apartment for days after that last video. I couldn't. I kept replaying the image of the Terrifier, just standing there in the store entrance, staring directly at the camera like he knew I was watching. It didn't make sense. None of it did. How was he always one step ahead of me? How did he know where I'd be, what I was doing before I even did it. The more I thought about it, the more the walls seemed to close in around me. Every inch of my apartment felt wrong, like it wasn't even mine anymore. I kept hearing things, small noises, scraping sounds inside the walls, faint whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, and that feeling, that unbearable sensation of being watched. It was like the Terrifier was inside my home, hidden just out of sight, always one breath away. Then, one night, something happened that made me realize just how far this had gone. It was around midnight, maybe later. I don't remember exactly. I hadn't been sleeping much, just dozing in and out of these restless nightmares that always ended the same way, with someone standing over my bed, watching. Every time I woke up in a cold sweat, the room would be dead quiet, but I'd still feel that presence, like someone had just been there and vanished the second I opened my eyes. That night was different. This time, I woke up to a sound. Click, click, click. At first, I couldn't place it. It wasn't a loud noise, just a subtle, rhythmic sound, like metal tapping on wood. I stayed perfectly still, my heart racing, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Then I realized it was coming from the hallway, right outside my bedroom door. I lay there, holding my breath, listening. The tapping continued, slow and steady, like someone was dragging something sharp along the floor. Click, click, click. My mind was racing, my body frozen in fear. I knew I had to move, to do something, but I couldn't bring myself to get out of bed. I just listened, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. I waited. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I had no sense of time anymore. My eyes were locked on the crack under the bedroom door, watching for any hint of movement, any shadow. But there was nothing, just silence. I don't know how long I waited before I finally found the courage to move. Slowly, I slid out of bed, careful not to make a sound. My bat was still by my side, the same one I'd kept close for days now. I gripped it tight as I crept toward the door, my pulse pounding in my ears. The air in the room felt thick, like I was moving through water. Every step was a struggle. When I reached the door, I pressed my ear against it, listening for any sign of life on the other side. Nothing. Just silence. I knew I couldn't stay locked in my room forever. Eventually, I'd have to face whatever was out there, whatever was waiting for me. So, with a deep breath, I unlocked the door and pulled it open. The hallway was dark, darker than it should have been. I had left the light on earlier, but now it was out. The only light came from the moon filtering through the blinds in the living room, casting long, twisted shadows along the floor. I stepped into the hallway, gripping the bat like it was my only lifeline. My breath was shallow, my hands slick with sweat. I moved slowly, inching toward the living room, scanning every shadow, every corner. But there was nothing. The apartment was empty. That's when I noticed the door. The front door to my apartment was unlocked. Wide open, in fact. It was swaying slightly, as if someone had just walked through it. I knew for a fact I'd locked it before going to bed. I always did. But now, here it was, hanging open like an invitation to step out into the darkness beyond. I was frozen. My instincts were screaming at me to run, to bolt the door and hide, but something kept me rooted in place. I felt this overwhelming dread, this suffocating fear, but I couldn't look away from that open door. It was like my body was being pulled toward it, against my will. And then I saw it, in the far corner of the living room, just at the edge of the shadows. There was something moving. I squinted, trying to make out what it was. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, maybe the curtains swaying in the breeze. But no, this was different. The shape was too solid, too deliberate. It took me a second to realize what I was seeing. A hand, pale, almost white, creeping out from behind the couch. Slowly, inch by inch, it reached forward, the fingers stretching toward the floor like they were searching for something. My heart stopped. I backed up, bumping into the wall, my legs like jelly. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see what was attached to that hand, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The hand moved again, gripping the edge of the couch, and then it pulled itself up. The figure that rose from behind the couch was tall, unnaturally tall, with limbs that seemed too long, too thin. Its face was still hidden in shadow, but I could feel its eyes on me, could feel the weight of its gaze pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I was paralyzed. Every muscle in my body screamed for me to run, to get out, but I couldn't move. All I could do was watch as the figure stepped forward, its footsteps silent, its movements impossibly smooth, like it was gliding across the floor. And then it spoke. Its voice was low, barely more than a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a blade. The contract is almost complete. I didn't wait to hear more. The second those words left its mouth, I bolted. I don't remember much of what happened next, just that I ran faster than I ever have in my life. I flew out the front door, down the stairs, and into the street, my heart slamming against my ribs. I didn't stop running until I was halfway across town, drenched in sweat, lungs burning. I found myself in a 24-hour diner, shaking so badly I could barely hold the cup of coffee the waitress gave me. I sat there for hours, trying to piece together what had just happened, trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the image of that hand, those long, pale fingers reaching out from the shadows. I knew, without a doubt, that I wasn't safe. Nowhere was safe. Not anymore. The Terrifier had found me, and this time, there was no escaping. I didn't go back to my apartment after that night. I couldn't. Just the thought of stepping foot inside those walls again sent a cold wave of terror through me. So, I stayed on the move, hopping from one cheap motel to the next, never staying in the same place for more than a night. I figured if I kept moving, if I never stayed still, maybe the Terrifier wouldn't be able to find me. Maybe I could outrun him. But deep down, I knew better. The thing is, you can't outrun something like him. The Terrifier isn't just some guy you can lose in a crowd. He's something else, something worse. And the contract was still open. I could feel it hanging over me like a noose, tightening every second I stayed alive. A week passed, then another. My life turned into a blur of sleepless nights and endless fear. Every noise made me jump. Every shadow felt like it was watching me. And every time I thought I might finally be alone, I'd see something just out of the corner of my eye that reminded me I wasn't. The first real sign that he was still on my trail came in the form of a message. I had been using a burner phone, trying to keep my location as hidden as possible. But one morning, when I checked it, there was a text. No number, no caller ID, just a message. The Terrifier never forgets. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. The message was clear. He was still out there, and he was still coming for me. It was only a matter of time. Then, things got worse. I started seeing him, not just in my nightmares, not just in the vague shadows at the edges of my vision, but really seeing him in the street, across from whatever motel I was staying in, or standing at the edge of a parking lot, just staring. He never moved, never came closer, but I knew he was watching, waiting for the right moment. The breaking point came about a month after I left my apartment. I was holed up in some rundown motel on the outskirts of town, barely sleeping, barely eating, just waiting for the inevitable. It was a stormy night, rain hammering against the windows, when I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. That same knock, the slow, patient, deliberate knock I had heard back at my apartment. Only this time, it was coming from the motel door. I froze. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I grabbed the bat, the same bat I'd been carrying with me ever since that night, and crept toward the door. I didn't know what I was going to do. Maybe run, maybe fight, maybe just collapse in fear. But I knew I couldn't stay still. The knock came again. Tap, tap, tap. With shaking hands, I reached for the peephole and looked through it. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I exhaled, a momentary rush of relief flooding through me. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe the fear was finally getting to me. But as I turned away from the door, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. In the mirror across the room, there was a figure standing behind me. I spun around, bat raised, ready to swing, but the room was empty. No one was there. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my own ragged breathing, the rain still pouring outside. I looked back at the mirror, and there he was, the Terrifier, standing right behind me in the reflection, his face a shadowy blur, his long, thin fingers stretching toward me. He wasn't real, not physically, but I could feel him. He was there, inside the walls, inside my mind, pulling me toward him. I stumbled backward, away from the mirror, heart racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But the more I backed away, the closer he got in the reflection. His hand reached out, his fingers brushing the surface of the mirror, almost as if he could pull me through. That's when I realized there was no running from him, no hiding. The Terrifier wasn't just after me. He was inside me. He always had been. The contract, the one I thought I'd made to get rid of Jake, had been about more than just him. It was about me. The Terrifier had marked me the moment I hit send on that email. And now, he was here to collect. I don't know how long I stood there, staring into the mirror, watching his figure grow larger, his presence more oppressive. I could feel him everywhere, around me, inside me. The room felt like it was closing in, the walls pushing me toward the mirror, toward him. The last thing I remember clearly is the mirror cracking, a spiderweb of fractures spreading across the glass, and through those cracks, his hand reached out, breaking through the surface, his fingers wrapping around my arm. And then, nothing. I woke up in a hospital 2 days later. The police told me I had been found unconscious in the motel room, surrounded by shattered glass. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of anyone else in the room but me. They said I must have had some kind of breakdown, maybe from stress, maybe from whatever I'd been running from. I didn't bother trying to explain. They wouldn't believe me if I did, but I know the truth. The Terrifier didn't need to break in. He never did. He was already there, waiting, watching, just like he always had been. I haven't seen him since that night. Not directly, anyway, but I still feel him. Every time I look in a mirror, I can see the faintest outline of his figure, standing just behind me, a shadow that never quite goes away. The contract, was never about Jake. It was always about me. I had hired the Terrifier, thinking I could control him, thinking I could use him to solve my problems. But you can't control something like that. Once you bring him into your life, he never really leaves. Now, every day is a waiting game. I don't know when he'll come for me again, but I know he will. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next year, maybe in another lifetime. But one thing's for sure, the Terrifier never forgets. I found a webcam app on the dark web. Every camera shows a room in my house. So, before I get into what happened, let me just say, I never thought I'd be the type of person to end up in some crazy deep web horror story. You hear about these things, right? But it always happens to someone else. Someone reckless or careless. Definitely not me. I'm just your average guy swiping through Tinder in his free time. Or at least I was, until all of this started. It was about 2 months ago when things took a weird turn. I was living alone in a 1-bedroom apartment, just out of college, with a 9-to-5 job I didn't care about, and a social life that existed mostly online. I'd been on Tinder for a while, but nothing serious ever came out of it. Just some harmless flirting, a couple of dates, and plenty of ghosting. You know how it is. Anyway, one night after a long, boring day at work, I decided to swipe through some profiles. There wasn't anything particularly special about that night. Just me, some fast food, and my phone in hand. I came across this girl named Emily. She looked cute in that girl next door kind of way. Glasses, messy bun, holding a cup of coffee in her profile picture. I swiped right, figuring nothing would come of it. But then, within minutes, I got a match. And not just a match, but a message, almost instantly. Hey there. Simple, casual, nothing out of the ordinary. I replied. We started chatting, and things were going surprisingly well. She was funny, quick with her replies, and we seemed to hit it off pretty fast. We talked about the usual stuff. Movies, music, our mutual disdain for early mornings. Over the next few days, our conversations kept getting longer. We even exchanged numbers and moved to texting, which felt like a good sign. She wasn't one of those bots or scammers you sometimes run into on these apps, so I thought I might have finally struck some luck. Here's where things started to get a little off. One night, we were texting, and she asked a pretty normal question. What are you up to tonight? Now, at that exact moment, I had just finished microwaving some leftover pizza, so I jokingly texted back, just living the bachelor life, pizza and Netflix. It was a throwaway comment, something I didn't think much about, but her next reply came fast. Oh, pepperoni or cheese. I paused for a second because, it was pepperoni, but I hadn't mentioned that. Okay, weird, but maybe it was just a lucky guess, right? I mean, pepperoni is common, so I brushed it off and went with it. Haha, yeah, pepperoni. How'd you know? She didn't answer that though. Instead, she asked me something else, and the conversation moved on. The thing is, that tiny weird moment kind of sat with me, but not in a way that made me feel alarmed. More like, that was odd, and I let it go. Things continued like that for the next week or so. She'd make little guesses that seemed oddly specific sometimes, like how I was drinking iced coffee instead of hot, or that I'd been playing video games before bed. Again, nothing crazy, but enough to make me think she was either really good at reading people, or maybe I was sharing more than I thought. Then came the night I noticed the username. I was up late, couldn't sleep, and I found myself scrolling Reddit. There's a subreddit I follow that post creepy internet stories, and it's always a fun, guilty pleasure of mine. I was halfway through some post about someone's strange experience on the dark web when I noticed a comment thread discussing online dating horror stories. Naturally, I clicked on it. People were sharing stories about weird Tinder matches and strange conversations, and I was enjoying the read when a comment caught my eye. The username was _realgame_190, and the comment was brief but eerie. Watch who you match with. They might already know who you are. That in itself wasn't too weird. I mean, it's Reddit. People post vague, creepy stuff all the time for upvotes. But the weird thing? Real game. 190 was a username I recognized. Not from Reddit, though. It was the same username that had liked one of my old Instagram photos. I know, because I remembered thinking it was a bot account and didn't think twice about it at the time. Now I'm staring at the screen, feeling a slight chill down my spine. I tried to shake off the feeling. It could just be a coincidence. But I'm someone who notices patterns, and something about this wasn't sitting right with me. I didn't think much more about it that night. I closed Reddit, tried to push the thought out of my head, and went back to texting Emily. It was late, but she was still up, and we talked for a while before I passed out. That's when things started escalating. A couple of days later, I got a message that turned everything upside down. It wasn't from Emily. It was from a random number I didn't recognize. All the text said was, "I bet $50 she picks you. Good luck." I had no idea what that meant, and I was about to delete it when another text followed. "You're in the lead right now, but things could change." The lead? What lead? I replied with, "Who is this?" But got no answer, just silence. But that was just the beginning. Alright, so I thought that weird text was just a prank. Maybe someone got the wrong number, or maybe it was just some friend messing with me. I wasn't exactly freaked out yet, but then again, I'm not the kind of person who assumes the worst right away. I let it slide. Big mistake. Over the next couple of days, things got stranger. Emily and I were still talking, but there was something different about our conversations now. She wasn't just making those weird, lucky guesses anymore. It started to feel like she knew more than she should. Like, way more. Little details about my day-to-day life that I hadn't shared with her. Or anyone, for that matter. One night, we were texting about movies, and I told her I had just finished watching The Shining. You know, classic horror stuff. She replied instantly, "Oh, you watched it with the lights off, right?" Okay, now that was weird. She was right. I had been watching it in the dark, but I hadn't mentioned that part. I tried to play it cool, though. "Yeah, I guess that's the best way to watch horror movies, right?" She replied, "Exactly. And on that brown couch of yours, too, I bet." I stopped dead. I hadn't told her anything about my apartment. I hadn't mentioned my furniture, where I was sitting, or anything that specific. My pulse started racing a bit. I remember just staring at the screen for a good minute, wondering if I had said something about my couch without realizing it. I scrolled up through our old texts, searching for any mention of it. Nothing. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had posted a picture of my place on Instagram or something, and she'd seen it. But no. I checked, and the only photo on my feed was from a trip to the beach months ago. So, how the hell did she know? I didn't respond to a message for a while. I needed to think. My mind was spinning, trying to figure out how this random girl I matched with on Tinder knew details about my apartment. But while I was lost in thought, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Emily. I'm sorry. Did I freak you out? Now I was really unsettled. There was no way she could have known she'd freaked me out unless she was somehow watching me. I replied cautiously, "Nah, it's cool. Just curious how you knew about my couch, that's all." Her response came back almost immediately. "Lucky guess. But by now, I wasn't buying it. Something wasn't right, and that feeling in my gut was growing. I decided to pull back a bit, told her I had to get up early and needed to call it a night. She said goodnight, but there was something about her last text that lingered in my mind. Sweet dreams. It felt too knowing, too intentional. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. I kept replaying that conversation over and over in my head, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. I even asked a couple of coworkers if they'd ever had weird experiences with Tinder or online dating. They laughed it off, shared some cringy stories about bad dates or catfish situations, but no one had dealt with anything like this. I didn't mention the text from the random number because honestly, I was starting to feel like maybe I was overreacting. But that night, I received another message from the same unknown number. This time, it was a screenshot. At first, I didn't even understand what I was looking at. The image was a screen capture of what seemed like some kind of forum, dark-themed, with usernames and comments cluttering the page. At the top of the thread was my name, followed by a long list of dates. The most recent one? The day I had matched with Emily. Above my name was a question in bold. Which one will he pick? My heart dropped into my stomach. There were comments underneath, people throwing around random guesses, analyzing every little thing I'd done over the past couple of weeks. I was reading through them, trying to make sense of it all, when I noticed something even more chilling. Some of the usernames in the thread were familiar. Real Game 190 was there, along with a few others I'd seen liking my posts or following me on random social media platforms. These weren't just strangers on the internet. They were people who had been watching me, tracking me, and the worst part, they were betting on me, on who I'd date, who I'd match with next, how long it would take for me to figure it out. It wasn't just a game to them, it was entertainment, and I was the unwilling contestant. I was shaking at this point. My mind raced through the possibilities. Was Emily in on this? Had she been part of the game from the start? I didn't know who to trust. All I knew was that I needed to get out of this mess, fast. I tried calling the number that had sent the screenshot, but of course, it didn't go through. Typical burner phone stuff. My next move was to confront Emily. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions, but I had to know. I opened our text thread, my hands still trembling, and typed out a message. "Hey, we need to talk." But before I could hit send, a new message popped up on my screen. This one wasn't from Emily or the burner number. It was from another unknown number, and it made my blood run cold. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." I stared at the message in disbelief. Whoever these people were, they were watching everything. Every text, every move I made. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I wasn't just being tracked, I was being controlled. And the game wasn't over yet. I didn't sleep that night. After getting that last message, I wouldn't do that if I were you. I felt like I had a spotlight on me in my own apartment. Every shadow seemed suspicious. I kept glancing at my windows, expecting someone to be watching me from outside. The worst part? I had no idea who they were or what they wanted from me. It felt like my life had turned into some twisted experiment. and I was the lab rat trapped in the maze. The first thing I did the next morning was delete my Tinder account. I figured cutting off the connection to Emily might at least stop whatever this was. But deep down, I knew that wouldn't be enough. If they had already tracked me across other platforms, Tinder was just the tip of the iceberg. The messages didn't stop either. Around noon, I got another text from the same burner number that had sent the screenshot of the forum the night before. This time, it was even more cryptic. You've made things interesting. The others think you'll figure it out soon, but I'm not so sure. Figure it out? Figure what out? I wanted to scream. They were toying with me, dangling bits of information just out of reach. But what was I supposed to be solving? I was just a guy who had swiped on Tinder and ended up in some messed up dark web circus. I needed answers, but I didn't know where to start. So, I did what any rational person would do. I Googled dark web betting on people. Spoiler alert, bad idea. If you've ever gone down that particular rabbit hole, you'll know that you're more likely to find pages filled with conspiracy theories and sensationalist headlines than anything useful. I was drowning in horror stories about black markets, human trafficking, and hitmen-for-hire. It wasn't helpful. It only made my paranoia worse. I spent hours spiraling through internet threads, refreshing my inbox, hoping for some kind of clue. Then, late in the afternoon, another text came in. This one was from a different number, but I knew it was from the same people. You're not playing by the rules. That message hit me hard, not because of what it said, but because of what it implied. There were rules to this game, and I hadn't even realized I was playing. I had to get out of my apartment. The walls were closing in, and I couldn't sit still anymore. I grabbed my jacket and went for a walk around my neighborhood, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. It didn't. As I wandered down the familiar streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every passing car felt like it was moving a little too slowly. Every stranger's glance felt like it lingered a little too long. Paranoia clung to me like a second skin, and by the time I got home, I felt worse than before. When I got back to my apartment, there was an envelope waiting for me. No return address, no markings, just a plain white envelope slid halfway under my door. My heart was pounding in my chest as I picked it up, knowing full well it wasn't going to be good news. I carefully tore it open, expecting some kind of threat or ransom demand. What I found was even worse. Inside was a single piece of paper with a typed message. Rule number 1, you can't back out. Rule number 2, don't involve anyone else. Rule number 3, keep your phone charged. That was it. No signature. No explanation. Just those 3 sentences printed neatly in black ink. I stared at the note, feeling a mix of dread and confusion. Keep your phone charged? What kind of rule was that? I wanted to throw the note away, but something told me I needed to hold on to it. Whoever these people were, they had eyes on me, and now they were laying down ground rules. For what, exactly? I still had no idea. That night, I turned my phone off and left it on my nightstand. I needed some kind of break from the barrage of texts, and besides, I figured they couldn't mess with me if I wasn't connected. But that was another mistake. I woke up the next morning to find my phone plugged into the wall, fully charged. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even moved it from my nightstand. And yet, there it was, with a fresh 100% battery, just waiting for me. My skin went cold. Someone had been inside my apartment while I was sleeping. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. They weren't just watching me. They could reach me whenever they wanted. I grabbed my phone, half expecting another message, and sure enough, it was there. Rule number 3, keep your phone charged. You're welcome. I threw my phone across the room. It hit the wall with a loud crack and fell to the floor, the screen flickering for a second before going black. I stood there, frozen, trying to piece together what had just happened. I had locked my door before going to bed, and I lived on the 3rd floor. There were no windows open, no signs of forced entry. How the hell had they gotten inside? And then the thought hit me. What if they didn't need to get inside? I was being monitored, probably hacked. Maybe my phone, my laptop, hell, even my smart TV could have been compromised. That would explain how they always seemed to know what I was doing. I had made myself an open book for them, and I hadn't even realized it. But then, why the physical note? Why the envelope under my door? I couldn't wrap my head around it, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just some online prank or dark web betting game anymore. It had become something else, something much more real. I needed help, but rule number 2 was glaring at me from that note. Don't involve anyone else. And now that I knew they could reach me whenever they wanted, I had to believe they were serious about that. If I tried to tell anyone, if I involved the police, or even a friend, I had no idea what they'd do next. I was trapped in their game, following rules I didn't understand, and the worst part, I had no idea how long this would last, or what the end game even was, but I had a feeling I was about to find out. After that night, I stopped sleeping. How could I, when the thought of someone or something could just waltz into my apartment while I was out cold? I spent the next few nights sitting in my living room with the lights on, phone in hand, just waiting. Waiting for what? I didn't know. Another message? Another sign that I wasn't alone. At this point, the silence was even worse. But of course, the silence didn't last long. On the 3rd night of my self-imposed insomnia, at around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. I flinched so hard I almost dropped it. I stared at the screen for a moment, my thumb hovering over the notification. The message wasn't from the burner numbers this time. No, it was from Emily. Miss me yet? That familiar little wink. The same one she'd used at the end of her goodnight texts. My hand started shaking again, but I replied, keeping it as casual as I could. Yeah, it's been a few days. Thought you ghosted me. She responded almost instantly. Never. Just been giving you some space. That damn wink again. I stared at the screen, wondering if Emily even existed. Had she ever? Or had this whole thing, her profile, our conversations, been manufactured as part of this twisted game? I was just about to ask her something, anything, when another message came through. This one wasn't from her. We told you not to break the rules. My heart skipped a beat. I dropped my phone onto the couch and backed away from it like it was radioactive. I hadn't even done anything. Emily had messaged me, and I hadn't told anyone about what was happening. How could I have broken any rules? But then, my phone buzzed again. You're trying to cheat. You don't get to talk to her now. You're not ready yet. Ready for what? What did they mean? I was barely holding it together at this point, and now I was being accused of cheating in a game I didn't understand. I grabbed my phone, desperate for answers, and fired off a text to Emily. What's going on? Who are you really? I waited for a response. Seconds ticked by, and nothing. Then, after what felt like an eternity, a new text appeared, but it wasn't from Emily. She's not yours to talk to anymore. You'll get her back if you play nice. Now, it's time for the next round. The next round? I didn't know what that meant, but I was about to find out. The next day, a package arrived at my door. It was small, nondescript, with no return address, just like the envelope from before. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct in my body told me to throw it away, to get as far from it as possible. But I knew I didn't have a choice. Whatever this game was, it wasn't going to end until I played along. Inside the package was a cheap prepaid phone, the kind you can get at a convenience store, with no contract, no identity attached to it. There was a note inside too. One line, printed in that same neat black ink. "You'll use this from now on." I stared at the phone, feeling the weight of what it represented. They were cutting me off from my own life. No more calls or texts from my friends or family. No more Emily. Just this burner phone that would connect me to them. I wanted to throw it across the room, but I didn't. Instead, I turned it on. The phone buzzed to life with a single message already waiting for me. "Welcome to round 2. The stakes are higher now. Fail, and she's gone for good. Succeed, and you get a little more freedom. Your next task is simple. Go to the corner of 5th and Elm at 9 p.m. You'll find someone waiting. Don't be late." It was like a punch to the gut. She's gone for good. They meant Emily, or at least whatever version of Emily existed in this twisted game. I didn't know if I even cared about her anymore, but the idea that these people could just erase someone from my life like that was terrifying. And that part about a little more freedom, I didn't know what that meant, but I didn't have time to think about it. I had an appointment to keep. By 8:45 p.m., I was standing at the corner of 5th and Elm. It was a quiet intersection in a part of town I didn't visit often. The streetlights flickered, and the only sound was the distant hum of traffic. I kept looking around, waiting for someone to approach me. I didn't even know what I was looking for. A person, a sign, anything. Then, at exactly 9 p.m., a car pulled up. The windows were tinted, but the passenger window rolled down just a crack. I could barely make out a face inside. A man. His voice was deep, cold, and mechanical, like he'd rehearsed what he was about to say. "Get in." I didn't move. I couldn't. This was the part in every horror movie where the protagonist makes the worst possible decision, right? They get in the car, and then they're never seen again. But this wasn't a movie. This was my life, and I didn't have a choice. I got in. The car pulled away from the curb in silence. I glanced at the driver, another man, this one wearing sunglasses, even though it was night. His jaw was set, his face emotionless, like this was just another day on the job for him. We drove for what felt like hours, but it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. The city faded into the background, replaced by empty roads and dense woods. Finally, we pulled off the main road and onto a dirt path, heading deeper into the forest. I tried to keep track of where we were going, but it was useless. The road twisted and turned, and soon I was completely disoriented. We stopped in front of an old abandoned building, the kind of place you'd expect to find in one of those urban exploration videos on YouTube, covered in graffiti and with broken windows. The man in the passenger seat turned to me. "Inside, you'll find a key. The key will lead you to the next step. Don't take too long." I opened the car door, my stomach in knots, and stepped out into the cold night air. The building loomed in front of me, dark and silent. The car didn't leave though. It just sat there, engine idling, waiting for me to make my move. I took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance. Inside, the place was even creepier than it looked from the outside. The air was damp and stale, and every step I took echoed through the empty halls. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and broken glass crunched under my shoes. I kept my phone's flashlight on, sweeping it back and forth as I searched for the key. I had no idea what I was looking for or where to find it. The whole place felt like a maze, and the deeper I went, the more disoriented I became. But I couldn't turn back. Not now. Not when I was this far in. Then, in one of the rooms, I saw it. A small metal box, sitting on an old rusted table in the corner. I approached it cautiously, half expecting something to jump out at me, but nothing happened. I lifted the lid, and there it was, a single key, taped to a piece of paper with a new message on it. "This is your only chance. Don't let us down." I stood there, staring at the key in my hand, my breath shallow and shaky. The message attached to it: "This is your only chance. Don't let us down," echoed in my head like a warning. I didn't know what I was supposed to unlock, what this only chance was, but I knew there was no turning back now. Whatever sick game I was trapped in, this was it. The final move. The car was still waiting outside, engine running like a silent threat. I shoved the key into my pocket and made my way out of the building, every step heavier than the last. The guys in the car didn't say a word when I got in. We just started driving again, deeper into the woods. I didn't know where they were taking me, and honestly, I was too exhausted and numb to care. I felt like I was floating outside of my own body, watching myself from a distance. Was this really happening? Was I really being driven around by strangers in the middle of the night, after breaking into some abandoned building to retrieve a key that I had no clue what to do with? None of it made sense. We kept driving, the trees on either side of the road growing denser, darker. The deeper we went, the more isolated I felt. The city wasn't just behind me. It felt like it had disappeared completely, like the rest of the world didn't exist anymore, and all that was left was this car, these men, and me. Finally, the car stopped. I was jolted back to reality. We were in front of a cabin now, small, decrepit, barely standing. It looked even older than the abandoned building. The windows were boarded up, and the front door hung slightly ajar, swaying in the wind. The man in the passenger seat turned to me again, his voice cold and flat. "The keys for the basement. Finish the job, and you'll get what you've been asking for." "What I've been asking for?" I echoed, confused. I hadn't asked for any of this, but they didn't elaborate. They never did. I got out of the car, my feet crunching against the gravel as I made my way toward the cabin. The place smelled damp, like rot and mold, and the air was thick with decay. I pushed the door open, wincing as it creaked loudly in the quiet night. Inside, it was worse. The floor was covered in dirt, and the walls were coated in layers of grime. But none of that mattered. I just needed to find the basement. I shone my flashlight around, searching for any sign of stairs. There, at the far end of the room, a small wooden door, slightly warped, leading down. This was it. I made my way over, gripping the key tightly in my hand. My heart was racing, pounding against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest. I unlocked the door and descended into the basement. The air was colder down here. I could feel it clinging to my skin, heavy and damp. The stairs creaked beneath me, each step feeling like it might give way at any moment. When I reached the bottom, the first thing I noticed was the smell, like something had been rotting down here for years. I fought the urge to gag as I shone the flashlight around. The room was empty except for a single chair in the center, and tied to that chair was a person, Emily. She was slumped over, her head hanging low, arms bound tightly to the chair with thick rope. I rushed over to her, dropping the flashlight and fumbling to untie her hands. "Emily? Emily, wake up!" My voice cracked as I spoke, panic rising in my chest. She didn't respond. I pulled at the ropes, my hands shaking, trying to free her. As I worked, I heard something. Footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I froze, glancing up toward the ceiling. The door at the top of the stairs slammed shut, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a lock clicking into place. They had trapped us. My mind was racing. This was part of their game. The final round. I had followed all their rules, done everything they asked, and now they had locked me in a basement with the girl they had been dangling in front of me. This whole time, I had to get her out. I had to get us out. Finally, the ropes came loose, and Emily slumped forward into my arms. She was breathing, barely, but she wasn't conscious. I tried shaking her gently, calling her name again and again, but nothing worked. I grabbed the flashlight and shone it on her face. That's when I saw it. Her eyes were open, wide open, staring straight ahead, completely unblinking. My stomach dropped. I let go of her, stumbling back. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely keep hold of the flashlight. Emily wasn't unconscious. She wasn't even alive. Her skin was pale, ice cold to the touch. I hadn't saved her. I had been set up. I backed away, my breath catching in my throat, and that's when I heard it. Another message buzzed through on the burner phone. I didn't want to look at it, but I had to. I knew it was the only way to understand what was happening. "Game over. You lost." That was it. No explanation, no demands, just those 4 words, mocking me, sealing my fate. I felt a chill run down my spine. My hands were slick with sweat, and as I dropped the flashlight, it rolled to the side, casting long, eerie shadows across the basement walls. The footsteps started again, coming closer this time, right above me, directly over my head. The last thing I remember before the lights went out was the sound of something heavy dragging across the floor above, like they were getting ready to come down. And that's when I realized the real game had just begun.